When you are 74, you begin to notice things that others try to hide. The ability to read people, honed by years of diplomatic service, doesn't fade with age, even if your loved ones think otherwise, especially if those loved ones are your own family. I watched Quentin and Isolde through my living room window. They were standing outside their brand new SUV, which cost at least $60,000. Money my son certainly couldn't make at his modest law firm specializing in dubious accident claims. Quentin was talking to Isolde about something, and even from a distance I recognized that particular gesture when he nervously adjusted his expensive tie. It's what he used to do as a child when he lied about a broken vase or money stolen from my wallet. Some things never change. Before they noticed my observation, I stepped away from the window and slowly lowered myself into the worn leather chair. My home in Bluefield was one of the few places I truly felt safe. After 30 years of diplomatic service in countries ranging from cold Sweden to scorching Ethiopia, I could finally allow myself some peace. At least that's what I thought until Eleanor died 5 years ago. My wife, a person who was never interested in my money. She loved me, not my position or bank account. After she left, Quentin and Isolde began to visit me more often, showing more and more concern each month. The doorbell interrupted my musings. I deliberately hesitated before going to the door. Let them wait. Years have taught me that keeping others waiting is a little power you can exercise at any age. "Dad!" Quentin's voice sounded exaggeratedly happy when I finally opened the door. "You look good." Liar. I looked like the old man I was. Gray hair, wrinkled skin, slouching posture. The years had not been particularly kind to my appearance, but they had given me something more valuable, an understanding of human nature. "Quentin, Isolde," I nodded. "I wasn't expecting you today." "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by," Isolde interjected, walking into the house uninvited. Her perfume left a trail so strong it would have been considered an insult in diplomatic circles. "I brought your favorite pie." I never liked blueberry pie, and Eleanor knew it well. Isolde didn't even bother to memorize such trivialities. "How nice of you," I replied, accepting the pie box. "Come into the living room." My house wasn't luxurious. I'd always preferred understated elegance to ostentatious opulence. The bookshelves along the walls were filled with volumes on history, politics, and anthropology. Souvenirs from the countries where I'd served were everywhere. A carved box from Morocco, miniature masks from West Africa, fine porcelain from China. Quentin never showed any interest in my collection, even though some of the items were worth a fortune. "How's your health, Papa?" Quentin asked, settling into the chair across from me. Isolde took a seat on the couch, her perfectly straight back showing tension. "Not bad for someone my age," I answered, deliberately adding weakness to my voice. "The doctor says your heart's holding up so far." "Are you taking all your medications?" Isolde's voice sounded worried, but her eyes gave her away. She wasn't looking at me, but at the antique clock on the mantelpiece, a gift from the Swedish royal family for successful negotiations in the 80s. "Of course," I lied with ease. "In fact, my health was much better than I let them think." "And how are things going for you? How's your law practice going, Quentin?" My son tensed. "It's doing great. Recently won a major workplace injury case." "Congratulations," I nodded. "Must be a nice fee." "A decent one," he said evasively, avoiding my gaze. There was silence in the room. Isolde was the first to break it. "By the way, have you thought about hiring an au pair? This house is too big for you alone." "Here it is. My first attempt at control." "I'm doing okay so far," I replied. "I like to decide where things belong." "But you can afford help with your pension," Isolde insisted. "I've heard that diplomats of your rank have very generous allowances." I allowed myself a slight smile. "Equern, the state does not forget its employees, but it's best to save the money for a rainy day." Quentin and Isolde exchanged quick glances. I could almost hear their thoughts. "How much money exactly? Where is it kept?" "Dad," Quentin began cautiously, "I've been thinking about your finances. It might be a good idea to review your investment portfolio. It's a great time to make certain investments." "Really?" I feigned interest. "Sure, Yet, what kind of investments?" "I know a financial advisor. I could arrange a meeting." "That's very thoughtful of you," I said, sipping my tea. "But I prefer old school. All my savings are in safe hands." I saw Quentin clench his teeth. When he was young, he always did that when I refused to pay for his next whim. My mistake was working too hard and paying too little attention to my upbringing as a child. Eleanor was soft, and Quentin quickly learned to manipulate her. By the time I retired and finally paid attention to what my son had become, it was too late. He had grown selfish and greedy, and the Isolde he met in college only reinforced those qualities. Eswan, still, Daddy, Isolde continued, we're restless. You're here alone, and at your age, at my age, people usually know what they want. I interrupted her, and they value their independence. The conversation turned to neutral topics, but I knew they wouldn't give up. In the 5 years since Eleanor's death, I'd watched their care become more and more intrusive. First, it was infrequent visits, then frequent calls asking how I was feeling. They would accidentally find brochures about nursing homes and leave them in prominent places in my home. 3 months ago, Quentin first talked about a trust fund and putting the management of my assets in safe hands. His hands, of course. When they finally left, promising to stop by in a couple days, I closed the door behind them and breathed a sigh of relief. Walking over to the window, I watched them get into their expensive automobile. Quentin was saying something emotionally, waving his arms. Isolde was shaking her head. I knew the conversation was about me and my money. It was always just about that. Slowly, I walked to my office and opened the safe hidden behind the false panel of the bookcase. Inside was a folder of documents. I opened it and looked through the contents. Swiss bank statements, real estate deeds in 3 countries, bearer certificates. A fortune accumulated over decades of service through investments and connections. Quentin and Isolde only knew about my official pension and one account at a local Bluefields bank. That account was a decoy, large enough to induce greed, but incomparable to what I actually had. I closed the folder and returned it to the safe. My hearing, still sharp despite my age, picked up a familiar sound, the creak of the floorboards in the hallway. The same creak that I deliberately left undone for years. The perfect early warning system. Someone was in the house. I closed the safe silently and turned to the study door. Quentin was standing in the doorway. I forgot my phone, he said, holding up his cell phone. I'm sorry I scared you. It's okay, I replied, wondering how much he'd seen. I was just going through some old letters. His gaze slid to the bookcase, then back to me. Do you need help with anything while I'm here? No thanks, I've got everything under control. He nodded and left. I waited for the sound of the front door closing and exhaled. Then I went to the window and made sure the car was really gone. They were getting impatient and careless. I returned to my chair and thought, years of diplomatic service had taught me that the best defense was to anticipate the enemy's actions, and Quentin and Isolde, unfortunately, had become my adversaries. If they decide to act, I need to be ready. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Archibald Twist speaking. A familiar voice with a slight British accent answered. Archie, it's Humphrey. We need to talk. Humphrey, you old fox. How many years has it been? To what do I owe this honor? Remember our deal in Istanbul? I think it's time I took you up on your offer. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Archibald chuckled. Really? This must be serious. Will you meet me at the usual place, tomorrow at noon? I'll be waiting, I answered and hung up. I got up from the chair and walked over to the picture on the wall. Eleanor and I were standing at the Eiffel Tower, young, happy, full of hope. I believed then that my son would grow up to be a different person. I'm sorry, Ellie, I whispered, looking at the photo. But you always knew I wasn't the type to let myself be used, not even to my own family. I turned away from the photo and began to prepare for tomorrow. Quentin and Isolde thought they were dealing with a naive old man. They were about to learn that diplomats of my generation knew far more about strategy and tactics than most military men, and I intended to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The meeting with Archibald went exactly as I expected. An old friend with whom we had conducted more than one crisis negotiation in the Middle East. He had not changed a bit over the years of our separation. The same sharp mind hidden behind the mask of a good-natured weirdo. We discussed the situation with my son, and Archie promised to think about possible options. But fate had it that the plan of revenge began to take shape sooner than I had expected. That evening I returned home later than usual. The setting sun was coloring the streets of Bluefield in copper tones when I spotted a familiar SUV outside my house. Quentin and Isolde had decided to pay another visit. I purposely didn't ring the doorbell, instead pulling out my spare key and opening the back door very quietly. Muffled voices came from the living room. I walked cautiously down the hallway and stopped in the shadows, listening. "Are you sure no one saw us come in?" Isolde's voice sounded tense. "Relax," Quentin replied. "At this time, he's always at his old boys' club, playing chess. We have at least an hour. Still, it's risky. What if he comes back suddenly? Then we'll say we were worried and thought we'd check to see if everything was all right. I have a key, officially for emergencies." I hear them moving around the living room, opening drawers, checking the books on the shelves. The crisp tapping of Isolde's heels on the parquet gave away her nervousness. "Nothing," Quentin said disappointedly. "There must be some papers, bank statements, anything. Maybe in the study. Is there a safe in there?" "Oh, there must be. All these old diplomats have safes full of secrets." I felt the bile rising in my throat. My own son searching my house, talking about me as a hindrance to his plans. The years spent securing his future, the sleepless nights over his crib when he was sick, the education paid for, it all meant nothing to him. They headed toward the study, and I retreated silently into the shadows beneath the stairs. Isolde walked past, her perfume making my nose water. Quentin followed her, his face as focused as a predator on the prowl. "Watch carefully," he said. "The old man is tricky, but he must have the papers here somewhere." I waited until they entered the office, then walked quietly to the front door, opened and closed it loud enough for them to hear. "Quentin? Isolde?" I called out, deliberately making my voice sound old and surprised. "Are you here?" There was a commotion. Then Quentin appeared with a fake smile on his face. "Dad, we were worried when you didn't answer the phone." "My phone ran out of battery," I lied, patting my pocket. "I didn't expect to see you again today." Isolde came out of the office, her cheeks slightly pink. "I left my sunglasses here," she said, picking up a cheap pair of sunglasses I'd never seen before. "I see," I nodded. "Did you find them?" "Yeah, it's okay," she answered quickly. "Actually, we should get going. Quentin has a meeting with a client." "But you just got here." I gave her a look of disappointment. "Would you like some tea?" "Some other time, Dad." Quentin was already heading for the door. "We just wanted to make sure you were okay." After they left, I searched the house thoroughly, checking to see if they'd left any bugs or hidden cameras. I found nothing, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try again. I made my way to the study and examined the bookcase with the secret safe. Everything looked untouched, but they might be more persistent on their next visit. I sat back in my chair and thought about it. What I'd overheard by accident had changed everything. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively looking for a way to access my money now. My gaze fell on Eleanor's picture on the table. She'd always believed the best in people, even our son. "He's just lost," she used to say. "Give him time. He'll find his way." But there was no more time. Quentin had found his way, and that way led straight to my bank account. I pulled out my cell phone and called Archibald. "Archie, the situation has changed. They're moving faster than I thought." "How fast do we need to move?" "Very fast. You mentioned your connections in Turkey." "Yeah, my old friend Mehmet still works at the ministry." "Why?" "I think my son and his wife are planning a trip." The next day I started preparations. The first thing I did was visit my banker, the Honorable Harold Pembroke, who has managed my finances in Bluefields for 20 years. "I need to make a change to my account access," I said, sitting in his office overlooking the town's central square. "Of course, Mr. Twistleton," Harold nodded. "What kind of changes are you interested in?" "I'd like to add my son as a trustee." Harold raised his eyebrows in surprise. He knew me and my relationship with Quentin well. "Are you sure? You were usually cautious about this." "Times change, Harold. I'm 74 years old. It's time to think about succession." He nodded, though there was doubt in his eyes. "As you wish. We'll draw up the necessary papers." "There's something else," I added. "I want to transfer the bulk of the funds to another account, temporarily." "May I ask why?" "Let's call it a precaution. Old age paranoia, if you will." Harold smiled understandingly. "There's no room for paranoia in our business, Mr. Twistleton. Only healthy prudence." Leaving the bank, I went to my lawyer, Benjamin Holloway, the man who had drafted my will and knew more about my assets than anyone else. Sugwanam, Ben, I need some advice, I said, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. Yes, Humphrey. If someone gains unauthorized access to my Bluefields account, what are the consequences? Benjamin took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose thoughtfully. It depends on the circumstances. If it's a family member with power of attorney, technically it might not be considered theft. If you gave access, and if that access was gained fraudulently, his eyes narrowed, then it's fraud. Humphrey, do you have a problem with Quentin? I shrugged. Let's just say I foresee possible complications. Do you want to take legal steps? Not yet, but I need to know my options. Benjamin opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder with my name on it. You have a substantial fortune spread across a variety of assets. If you're worried that Quentin might try to gain control of it, my only concern is the Bluefield account. The rest of the assets are safe. Then perhaps we should consider temporarily freezing the account? I shook my head. No, let's just let things run their course. I just want to be prepared. Back at home, I began the next part of the plan. Opening my laptop, I wrote an email to my old colleague from Ankara, Mehmet Yilmaz. We hadn't spoken in years, but diplomats of my generation never forget old ties. Dear Mehmet, I hope these lines find you in good health. I have a request of a delicate nature concerning my son and his wife, who are planning to visit Turkey in the near future. I described the situation and what I required in detail. Mehmet replied within an hour. For an old friend, anything. Hotels, restaurants, excursions. My connections are at your service. They won't realize it's all set up. The next step was to create a decoy. I took a Bluefield bank statement out of the safe and placed it on the coffee table in the living room. Then I added next to it a booklet of the Turkish resort of Bodrum, which I had picked up at a travel agency that afternoon. On the booklet, I made notes in my own handwriting. Check prices. Maybe for June? Then I opened the bank's website on my laptop and purposely didn't log out, leaving the account balance information on the screen. The amount was impressive, just over $300,000, enough to induce greed, but only a fraction of my actual wealth. The final touch remained to be added. I took a small notebook out of my desk and wrote down a fictitious online banking password in it, then accidentally dropped it near my chair so that some of the pages were visible. The phone rang, interrupting my preparations. It was Archibald. Everything is ready on the Turkish side, he said without preamble. Mehmet had contacted the right people. The Amara Palace Hotel in Bodrum will be ready for the special operation, he hummed at the last word. Great, I replied. What about contacts at the airport? My nephew works in Istanbul security. He'll make sure your relative's luggage gets special attention. Nothing illegal, just a thorough check. I smiled. Thank you, Archie. I owe you one. Nonsense. Remember Cairo in '87? I still owe you one. After the conversation, I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes. The plan was almost ready. All I had to do was wait for Quentin and Isolde to take the bait. It didn't take long. The next day, they showed up at my house with another unnecessary gift, a wool scarf, even though it was May and the temperature was over 20 degrees. We were passing by and thought we'd stop by, Isolde said as she came into the living room. Her eyes immediately fell on the coffee table with the statement and the booklet. That's very kind of you, I replied, deliberately retreating into the kitchen. I'll make us some tea. From the kitchen through the ajar door, I could see Isolde quickly flipping through the booklet, then glancing at the statement. She whispered something to Quentin, and he nodded. Papa, he called out, are you planning a trip to Turkey? I came back with tea and cookies. Oh, that's just an old man's dreams. Eleanor has always wanted to visit Bodrum. Now I'm thinking maybe I should go there, in her memory. Alone? Isolde sounded worried. At your age, traveling like that is dangerous. Maybe, I sighed, but life is short, especially at my age. Quentin leaned forward. If you want, we could go with you, help with the organization. I shook my head. No, you have your own life. I don't want to be a burden. You'll never be a burden, Quentin countered with false sincerity. We're family. I wanted to laugh in his face. Instead, I gave him a look of sympathy. Thank you, son. I'll think about it. After they left, I called Archibald. They took the bait. Now we wait. How long do you think it'll take them? Knowing Quentin and his greed, no more than a week. I was right. 5 days later, I accidentally left my laptop on with the bank's website open, while I supposedly went to the weekly chess club meeting. In fact, I hid in the house across the street at my neighbor Henry's house, who gladly agreed to help play a trick on these young rascals. From the second-story window, Henry and I watched as Quentin and Isolde drove up to my house and, making sure no one was around, went inside using the spare key. "Here we go," I whispered, feeling a strange mixture of bitterness and satisfaction. Now it was up to their greed. Waiting is an art I've mastered in my years of diplomatic service. Sometimes the hardest part is just watching events unfold as they unfold. This time I didn't have to wait long. I was sitting in the chess club, pretending to be completely absorbed in a game with my old buddy Frederick, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. An email notification from the bank. Transfer of $295,000 confirmed. So fast. They didn't even wait for my next absence. Apparently the temptation was too great. "Checkmate in 3 moves, Frederick said, smiling. "You're probably right." I flipped my king, admitting defeat. I had other things on my mind today. "Problems?" Frederick began to arrange the pieces for a new game. "More like solutions," I replied, rising. "I apologize, but I have to go." On the way home, I pondered my next steps. Quentin and Isolde had transferred the money, so the next step was to leave. Their logic was clear. Take the money and disappear for a while, let me cool off, and then come back with a story about a failed investment or some other plausible lie. As I approached the house, I noticed their car was gone. Perhaps they were on their way. I went inside, scrutinizing every room. There was no sign of forced entry. Of course, why break in when you have a key? In the study, the computer was off, but not like I'd left it on. They hadn't even bothered to cover their tracks properly. I turned on the computer and checked my browser history. The most recent queries: Istanbul airfare, Bodrum resort reservations, currency exchange rates. The bait worked perfectly. I grinned and dialed Archibald's number. "They took the bait, Archie. They've transferred almost 300,000, and by the looks of it, they're already buying tickets to Turkey." "That's great," Archibald sounded pleased. "I'll warn Mehmet. When do you think they'll leave?" "Probably today or tomorrow." Quentin was never very patient. "Good, I'll make sure the welcoming committee is ready." I hung up the phone and poured myself a small shot of the scotch I'd been saving for special occasions. As I took a sip, I felt the bitterness of my son's betrayal mingle with a hot wave of anticipation. Well, let them enjoy their little victory. They don't have long to go. The ringing of the phone interrupted my musings. The number was unidentifiable, but I knew who it was. "Curry, Dad," Quentin's voice sounded strained. "I'm calling to tell you that Isolde and I are going away for a couple weeks. A little vacation, you know." "Of course, son," I replied, adding an aged weariness to my voice. "Where are you going?" A second pause. "Europe. A multi-country tour. We've been planning it for a long time. Lying has gotten easier and easier for him over the years." "Sounds wonderful. I hope you have a good vacation." "Now I left you some numbers for you to call in case of emergency. They're on the refrigerator." "Thanks for your concern." I tried to keep the irony out of my voice. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." "Sure, Dad. Well, bye." He hung up without even waiting for me to answer. I looked at the phone and shook my head. Did he really think I wouldn't notice the money was missing? Or was he hoping that the senile dementia I'd so carefully faked over the past few months would buy them time? I walked over to the refrigerator. There was indeed a sheet of numbers there, all fake, I was sure. I took it off and put it in my pocket. Then I made my way to the study and turned on my laptop. The banking app clearly displayed a transfer from Humphrey Twistleton's account to Quentin Twistleton's account. Amount $295,000. The reason for the transfer was listed as family assistance. At least I had the good conscience not to write gift. I took a screenshot and sent it to Benjamin Holloway with a short message, starting as agreed. Then I opened the special application Archibald had helped me install on my computer. It allowed me to track the movements of Quentin's phone, a small precaution I'd taken months ago when I'd first suspected something amiss. A dot on the map showed they were already at the airport. The second call of the evening was from Harold Pembroke, my banker. Mr. Twistleton, his voice sounded concerned. I received notification of a large transfer from your account. Given our recent conversation, I wanted to make sure it was an authorized transaction. Yes, Harold, it's fine, I replied calmly. It's exactly what I expected. Are you sure? The amount of money involved is quite substantial. I'm absolutely sure. Please don't block the transaction. Let it proceed as it should. Harold paused, then said, As you wish, sir, but if you change your mind, we have 48 hours to dispute the transfer. Don't worry, everything's going according to plan. After the call, I checked the tracking app again. Quentin and Isolde were still at the airport. Judging by the flight schedule I checked online, the closest flight to Istanbul was in 3 hours. That left me plenty of time for the next step. I dialed Mehmet Yilmaz's number in Ankara. Despite the late hour, he answered after the second beep. Humphrey, my friend, Archie has already broken the news. Your guests are on their way to us? That's right, Mehmet. There's a 2:23:30 flight to Istanbul. That's great. My men will be ready at the airport. And in Bodrum, they'll receive a special welcome. Are you sure they booked the Amara Palace? I've seen the searches, and the brochure that I accidentally left behind advertised this hotel. Knowing their appetite for luxury, I'm sure they chose it. Oh, good. The manager is my cousin. He's already been warned. Thank you, Mehmet. I owe you one. Nonsense, after you saved my career in the 90s, I'll always owe you. I hung up and checked Quentin's location again. They were still at the airport. I imagined them sitting in the waiting area, probably drinking champagne, celebrating their supposed victory. How Isolde is planning what to spend the money on. How Quentin brags about his cunning, enjoying the last quiet moments before the storm. I've decided to give them this brief bliss of ignorance. Soon they would have no time to celebrate. The next morning I woke up early. The tracking app showed that Quentin was already in Istanbul. The plane landed at 4 a.m. local time. I pictured them tired after an overnight flight, but still enthusiastic about their success. The phone rang. It was Mehmet again. They passed passport control, he reported. My man at the airport confirmed it. They're booking a transfer to Bodrum. That's great. How's the weather in Turkey? Perfect for a small thunderstorm, Mehmet grinned. Sunny, but with possible precipitation, especially for your relatives. Keep me posted. I spent the day doing the usual things, trying not to think about what was happening thousands of kilometers away. I trimmed the hedge, read the morning paper, went to the store for groceries. Neighbors greeted me as always, not suspecting that behind the facade of an ordinary pensioner hides a man who organized an international retaliation operation. In the evening came a message from Mehmet. Arrived in Bodrum, checked into the Amara Palace. Operation Hospitality has begun. I smiled and poured myself another whiskey. At that moment, my phone buzzed, alerting me to an incoming email. It was an automated notification from the bank. Dear Mr. Twistleton, we are pleased to inform you that your credit card has been activated in the Republic of Turkey. If this is not you, please contact us immediately. Of course it's not me. It's my son spending money stolen from me in another country, thinking he spent a naive old man. I put the phone away without taking any action. Let him enjoy shopping while he can. An hour later, another notification came about a large cash withdrawal. Apparently, they decided to hedge in case I did find it missing and tried to block the card. Clever, but not enough. I picked up my phone and dialed Benjamin Holloway's number. Ben, they're already in Turkey and have started spending the money. It's time to start the second part of the plan. Are you sure? It's not too late to just block the account and return the funds? I want them to learn a lesson, not just an inconvenience. Whatever you say, I'll prepare the paperwork for the Turkish authorities. The official fraud report will be ready by tomorrow morning. That's fine. Send copies to Mehmet Yilmaz. He'll know who to give them to. After the call, I turned on the TV, but I couldn't concentrate on the program. My thoughts kept returning to Quentin and Isolde. Right now, they were probably enjoying a luxurious room at the Amara Palace, ordering expensive food and drinks, planning excursions and shopping. I imagined them laughing as they discussed how easy it all went, how naive the old man father was. Enjoy it while you can. The morning would bring the first surprises. I pulled out of the safe a file of my real assets, Swiss accounts, real estate in Spain and Italy, investments in stable companies. Things Quentin didn't even know about. The 300,000 they stole was just the tip of the iceberg. Money I could have sacrificed to teach a lesson. A call from Archibald interrupted my thoughts. Everything is ready, he informed me. Mehmet confirmed that the first part of the operation would take place tomorrow at 10 a.m. local time. The hotel manager will personally handle the case. That's great. What about the luggage? It's already done. According to the airport report, their suitcases accidentally went to Antalya. They're supposed to deliver them in a couple days. Maybe. I chuckled. That's great. And security? It's all according to plan. As soon as they try to use the card for a large purchase, a flag will go off in the system. My contact at the bank has already added them to the suspicious transaction list. Thanks, Archie. I knew I could count on you. You're welcome. I have to admit, I'm getting a bit of a kick out of this operation. Reminds me of the good old days. I hung up the phone and went out onto the veranda. The evening air of Bluefield was filled with the scent of apple blossoms. A strange calmness swept over me. Years of bitterness and disappointment in my son had crystallized into a clear plan of action. I felt no joy at the thought of Quentin and Isolde's upcoming trials, but there was no regret either. They had made their choice. Now they would have to face the consequences. I returned to the house and checked the tracking app. Quentin's phone showed that they were in the hotel restaurant, probably enjoying an expensive dinner and planning for tomorrow. A tomorrow that would bring them the first unpleasant surprise of many I had in store for them. I poured myself another whiskey and raised my glass in a silent toast. Cheers, son, I whispered into the emptiness of the house. Enjoy your last carefree evening. The next morning brought the first reports on how my little retaliation operation was progressing. Mehmet sent a short message. The performance is starting. I imagined at that moment the manager of the Amara Palace Hotel knocking on the door of Quentin and Isolde's suite. It didn't take long for the phone to ring. Quentin's name popped up on the screen. I paused before answering, adjusting my voice to the tone of a benevolent and unsuspecting father. Good morning, son. How's Europe? A second pause, then a strained voice. Dad, we're having a little trouble. We're actually in Turkey. Turkey? I tried to act surprised. I thought you were on a European tour. Yeah, there was. There was an involuntary turn of events. His voice sounded strained. Listen, could you check one thing out for me? Sure, son, what's up? You haven't gotten any strange calls or messages from my bank? I smiled to myself. Here it comes. Here it comes. No, no calls. Is there something wrong? Probably a little problem with my card. Nothing serious, just a routine check. He was obviously trying to sound carefree, but the tension was in every word. What can I do to help? Just, if anyone asks, I put the money in your custody, okay? It's just a formality. Transferred the money? I put a little bit of bewilderment in my voice. What money, Quentin? Just a small sum. Remember when I said I wanted to help with your investment? It's part of that plan. His lying was getting worse. I guess the stress was starting to take its toll. I don't understand, son, but if anyone asks, I'll tell them you wired me money. Would that help? Yeah, thanks, Dad. I gotta go. I'll talk to you later. He disconnected without waiting for an answer. I leaned back in my chair, smiling contentedly. The first part of the plan worked. An hour later, a message from Mehmet arrived with a picture. It showed Quentin and Isolde standing in the hotel lobby with confused faces, surrounded by their hastily packed carry-on luggage. The caption under the photo read, "Eviction was successful," referred to an urgent diplomatic event and full hotel rebooking, offered assistance in finding alternative accommodation in town, at much higher rates, of course. I replied with a curt, "Excellent," and continued my usual morning routine, periodically checking Quentin's location via the tracking app. They were moving around the city, apparently looking for a new place to live. Finally, the dot stopped in an area that had mid-priced hotels. I grinned. From the 5-star luxury of the Amara Palace to a mediocre 3-star hotel. The first status drop for my ambitious relatives. Around noon, Archibald called. News from the financial front, he reported without preamble. Honor Quentin's bank card had been declined while trying to pay for the new hotel. The security system had worked perfectly. And the cash only managed to withdraw a limited amount before being blocked. My contact at the bank says they're requesting a source verification. These checks usually take 3 to 5 business days. That's great. I felt my lips stretch into a smile. What about the luggage? According to the latest information, their suitcases are still being processed in Antalya. They're supposed to arrive in 4 days. Maybe. That's perfect. Have they tried contacting the embassy? Not yet, but I've alerted my contact there. If they do, they'll get the most bureaucratic reception possible. In the evening of the same day, another message came from Mehmet. A couple tried to book an excursion to Ephesus. Strangely, all the seats were taken. Also tried to rent a car. All agencies reported no cars available. What next? I replied. Let them enjoy the uncertainty for another day, then move on to the next stage. During the night, I slept poorly. Not because of remorse, and no, I was absolutely sure of the justice of my actions. What bothered me was something else. I began to feel empty. When this story was over, what would be left? I would no longer have a family. The son I raised was capable of betrayal for money. I won't have grandchildren. Quentin and Isolde were too focused on their careers and status to think about children. In the morning, more messages arrived. Archibald reported that the bank had officially frozen the funds in Quentin's account until the circumstances were clarified. Mehmet reported that the couple looked increasingly confused and irritated. They spent the morning in a long line at the only bank in town that could cash an international money order, but of course there were unforeseen technical difficulties. By midday, I received another message from Mehmet. They've booked return tickets for tomorrow, apparently decided to cut their vacation short. Moving on to the final phase? I replied, yes, activate the security protocol. In the evening, another call came in from Quentin. He sounded almost panicked. Dad, I don't know what's going on, but we're having problems with our bank card and transfers. What kind of problems, son? I carefully added worry to my voice. They're freezing everything. They're saying something about suspicious activity and checking the source of funds. Oh my God, I pretended to be shocked. But why? Your money is honestly earned. Quentin was silent for a moment, then said quietly, yes, of course. It's just a misunderstanding. We're going home tomorrow, and we'll sort it out on the spot. That's a good idea. Is there anything I can do to help? No, thank you. His voice sounded more subdued. It's just, if you get any calls or letters from the bank, please let me know immediately. Surrented. Of course, son. Be careful. Anything can happen in a foreign country. After the conversation, I called Benjamin Holloway. They're coming back tomorrow, I said. It's time to prepare for the final part. The fraud report has already been forwarded to the appropriate authorities. As soon as they try to pass through passport control, the system will react. Good. I want them to fully realize the gravity of the situation. The next morning, I received a text from Mehmet. They arrived at Istanbul airport 4 hours before the flight. They look exhausted. The operation started at 8:30 in the morning local time. I imagined them standing in line at passport control, tired, irritated, but still hoping the worst was over. How suddenly they are politely asked to go to a separate room for additional screening. How it gradually dawns on them that this is not a routine procedure. The phone was silent all day. The tracking app showed that Quentin was still at Istanbul airport, even though their flight should have left as early as morning. In the evening, Mehmet sent a new message. The interrogation has been going on for the 6th hour. They deny all charges. The authorities have confiscated their passports pending clarification. They have been warned that they are not allowed to leave the country until the investigation is complete. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and a strange sadness. The plan was working even better than I had expected. They were stuck in a foreign country with no money, no luggage, and under suspicion of a serious financial crime, and all as a result of their own greed and treachery. Late that night, as I was about to go to bed, the phone finally rang. The number was unidentifiable, but I knew who it was. Yes, I answered, deliberately not showing that I recognized the caller. Dad, Quentin's voice sounded completely broken. We're in serious trouble. What's wrong? I tried to sound concerned, but not too informed. We were detained at the airport, 6 hours of interrogation. They took our passports. They said something about fraud and illegal financial transactions. Oh my God, I breathed. But how is that possible? You didn't do anything like that, did you? A long pause. Yes, of course not, his voice trembled. It's just some kind of horrible misunderstanding. But we need help, Dad. We can't leave the country. We have almost no money. Our cards are blocked. But how can I help from Bluefield? I let a note of helplessness creep into my voice. Maybe you know someone at the embassy? Or maybe you could contact our congressman. You've worked as a diplomat. You must have connections. I paused as if considering his request. I could try, son, but I've been retired for years. Most of my contacts are out of the picture. And then, if it's really about suspected financial fraud, even the embassy can't help much. But you have to do something. There was desperation in his voice. Shakira, we're stuck here with no money, no proper clothes, in a cheap hotel near the airport. And we could be called in for another interrogation at any moment. I understand how hard this is, I said with feigned sympathy. Let me think about it and see what I can do. In the meantime, maybe you should hire a local attorney. With what money, Dad? There was almost a sob in his voice. We've got everything locked up. Boom. What about the money you had with you? You said you were traveling in Europe. There must have been some savings. Pause again. It's not enough for a lawyer, and we don't even know who we can hire here. I'll try to find out. Maybe I still have some contacts in Turkey. Please, Dad, his voice sounded pleading. Do something. We need help. Sonny, I'll do my best, son, I replied with a heavy sigh. Call me tomorrow, and I'll tell you what I've learned. After the conversation, I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely empty. Quentin, my only son, was now completely dependent on my help. The very help he wouldn't get, at least not in the way he expected. I dialed Archibald's number. They're desperate, I said in lieu of a greeting. Quentin just called, practically begging for help. What are you going to do? What I've been planning all along. Let them suffer for a couple more days. Then I'll contact Mehmet and ask him to soften the situation, but they'll have to accept certain conditions. You're a cruel man, Humphrey. Archibald's voice sounded more admiration than reproach. No, I objected. I am a just man. They will get exactly what they deserve. The next day came a message from Mehmet. They are allowed to stay in the hotel, but forbidden to leave the city. They have to report to the police every day. They look completely broken. I nodded to myself. It was time to start the final phase of the operation. I texted Mehmet, prepare the ground for the situation to be resolved. But first, let them spend another day in the dark. In the evening, Quentin called again. His voice sounded even more desperate than the day before. Dad, did you find out anything? We're allowed to stay at the hotel, but we're in jail. We can't go anywhere. We're interrogated every day. We're running out of money. I'm working on it, son, I said. There may be a way to solve your problem, but I need a little more time. Ano, we don't have time. There was panic in his voice. We could be arrested at any moment. Isolde is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I understand, I said calmly, but legal matters take time, especially international ones. I'll contact you tomorrow with more specific information. I hung up the phone, feeling the determination growing inside. Tomorrow they would find out who was really behind all their misadventures, and what would be my condition for ending this nightmare. In the morning, I called Mehmet and gave instructions on how to handle the situation. It's time to end this game, I said. Inform the authorities that there has been a misunderstanding. Have them return their passports and allow them to leave the country. Are you sure? Mehmet sounded slightly disappointed. They could have suffered for a couple more days. That's enough. I want them home for the final act. If you say so. But there's a problem. Their return tickets are gone, and new ones cost considerably more. That's part of their lesson. Let them work it out for themselves. After talking to Mehmet, I called Benjamin and asked him to prepare all the necessary documents. Then I contacted Harold Pembroke at Bluefield Bank and arranged for the bulk of my fortune to be transferred to a special fund. Are you sure you want to do this now? Harold asked. Maybe we should wait and think it over. I've been thinking about it for the last 5 years, I answered, since Eleanor's death. No, I'm absolutely sure of my decision. That evening, as I sat in my office going through old photographs, I got a call from Quentin. His voice sounded both relieved and suspicious. Dad, I don't know what you did, but we just got our passports back. They said there was a misunderstanding and we're free to go. Really? I pretended to be surprised. That's wonderful news, son. Yeah, but, it's strange. Yesterday they were threatening to arrest me, and today suddenly it's all settled. You really don't know anything about this. I told you I'd try to use my old contacts. I guess they're still working. I let the hint slip into my voice. A pause on the other end of the line. Thanks anyway. We're going home in 2 days. These are the earliest tickets we could get. I'll be waiting. There's a lot we need to talk about. What do you mean? I'll see you when you get back. I hung up without waiting for an answer. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I went to the bank, met with a lawyer, talked to the heads of several local charitable organizations. By the time the plane with Quentin and Isolde landed at the Bluefield airport, everything was ready. They came to see me right from the airport. Even through the window, I could see how haggard they looked. Wrinkled clothes, dark circles under their eyes, lacking their usual gloss. Quentin was carrying the only small bag. Apparently their luggage had never been found. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Welcome home, I said, taking a step back to let them into the house. Quentin walked past me without a hug or a handshake. Isolde kept behind him like a shadow. Could I offer tea, or perhaps something stronger after such a journey? I asked with a touch of irony. To hell with pleasantries, Dad. Quentin collapsed into a chair in the living room. What kind of game are you playing? A game? I raised my eyebrows. I don't know what you mean. All that trouble in Turkey, the hotel, the bank cards, the luggage, the police. It couldn't have been an accident. I sat down leisurely across from him, folding my hands in my lap. What else could it have been? Isolde shifted nervously from foot to foot, her gaze wandering around the room, avoiding meeting mine. Sunum, someone set this whole thing up, Quentin said, stepping forward. And amazingly, everything started to work out after I called you. Too many coincidences. Really, I nodded. Maybe we should talk about one more coincidence. How almost $300,000 disappeared from my account just before you left. There was silence in the room. Quentin turned pale. Isolde involuntarily pressed her hand to her mouth. I don't know what you're talking about, Quentin finally said, but his voice trembled. Really? I pulled a folded piece of paper out of my pocket and handed it to him. Bank statement, transfer in your name. Reason, family assistance. Very touching. Quentin took the sheet with trembling fingers, then tossed it onto the coffee table. I can explain, he began. Isolde and I wanted to surprise you. An investment project that would double your savings by Christmas. We were going to pay it all back with interest. I laughed, hoarse and unfunny. You always were a lousy liar, Quentin. Even as a kid, you couldn't come up with a convincing story about a broken vase or missing cookies. It's true, Isolde intervened, her voice sounding desperate. We had the best of intentions. Shut. Enough. I raised my hand, cutting off the stream of excuses. I knew about your plans from the beginning. What? Quentin looked stunned. I overheard your conversation when you were searching my house for financial documents. I saw you digging through my computer, looking for access to my bank accounts. But how? I'm an old diplomat, son, not the helpless old man you thought I was. I deliberately left the statement in plain sight. I deliberately didn't log out of the banking system on the computer. I created the bait and you took the bait. Quentin was slow to realize what he'd said. You're saying all your problems in Turkey were orchestrated by me. The canceled hotel reservations, the luggage problems, the blocked cards, the interrogations at the airport. It was all part of my plan. But how? Isolde whispered. How could you? I still have connections, I shrugged. Friends in the right places. 30 years of diplomatic service doesn't go unnoticed. Quentin jumped up, his face contorted with rage. You had no right. We could have ended up in a Turkish prison. We could have been arrested. Did you have the right to steal my money? My own rage, held back for weeks, finally burst out. My only son and his wife were planning to steal from me and escape. What was I supposed to do? Sit back and let you do it? Quentin sank back into his chair, all his anger suddenly evaporating, leaving only fatigue. What now? You're going to sue us? You're going to put your son in jail? No, I shook my head. I could, but I won't. Instead, I have news for you. I took a second document out of my pocket and placed it on the table. What is it? Quentin asked, not touching the paper. My new will. I've removed you from the list of heirs. What? Quentin grabbed the document. You can't do that. I already did. My entire estate will go into a trust to fund community projects in Bluefields. Libraries, parks, programs to help underprivileged students. All the assets have already been transferred. The legalese is impeccable. Isolde has gone white. All of it? But the money the $300,000 you stole was just a small part of my fortune. A decoy. My real wealth was beyond your wildest dreams. It can't be, Quentin whispered. All these years you have lived so modestly, because I've never been obsessed with material possessions unlike you. I invested smartly, lived within my means, and created a fortune that could provide a trouble-free life for you and your children. If you had the patience to wait for the natural course of events, I stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. I want you to leave. I want my house key back before you go. Dad, Quentin stood up, his eyes a mixture of shock and despair. You can't do this. We're a family. Family doesn't steal from each other, I replied. A family doesn't betray trust for money. You destroyed our family the moment you decided to steal from me. Isolde burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Quentin stood with his fists clenched, his face reddened with anger and humiliation. You'll regret this, he hissed. We'll contest the will. Prove you're out of your mind. I smiled without a shadow of amusement. Try it. I have reports from 3 independent doctors confirming my full capacity. Testimony from neighbors and friends about my lucid mind. And most importantly, detailed documentation of all your machinations, including photos of you searching my house, recordings of you talking about stealing my money, bank statements of transfers. All of this is already with my attorney with instructions to turn it over to the authorities if you try to challenge my judgment. Quentin turned pale. You're bluffing. Do you want to check? We stood face to face, father and son, bound by blood but separated by the abyss of betrayal. In his eyes, I saw the moment of realization that the game was over. Come, Isolde, he finally said. There's nothing for us to do here. She stood up, still sobbing, and headed for the door. Quentin followed her, but stopped in the doorway. You're making a mistake, he said without turning around. You're going to be alone. All alone. Shimonimun. I've been alone for a long time, I replied. Ever since I realized my son was waiting for me to die for the inheritance. He walked out, slamming the door loudly. I went to the window and watched them get into the cab without their expensive SUV, which they probably had to sell to pay for unexpected expenses in Turkey. The car touched down, taking them out of my life. I returned to my chair and poured myself a whiskey. A strange calmness swept over me. The revenge I had so carefully planned had been accomplished, but I felt no satisfaction, just emptiness and a slight bitterness. The telephone rang. It was Archibald. How did it go? He asked. Exactly as I expected. They're gone. For good. And how do you feel? I thought for a moment. Free. And a little lonely. Why don't you come over for dinner? Linda's making her famous lasagna. Thanks, but not tonight. I need to be alone. After the conversation, I walked through the empty house, listening to the silence. For so many years, I'd lived with the idea that I had a family, albeit distant and not very caring. Now even that illusion was gone. I stopped at Eleanor's picture. You always said he'd grow up and change, I whispered, looking at her smiling face. I'm sorry, but you were wrong. In my office, I pulled a folder of new trust fund documents out of the safe. Eleanor Twistleton Fund for Bluefield Community Development, the title page read. The money I've been saving all my life will now serve a good cause. A new playground will be built in the park. They'll repair the roof on the old library. They'll pay for scholarships for able-bodied children from poor families. It was a better legacy than handing over a fortune to a son who valued nothing but money. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely light. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have a role to play. Not the naive old man in front of Quentin and Isolde, or the vengeful manipulator in front of myself. I could just be myself, Humphrey Twistleton, a 74-year-old widower with a lifetime's worth of memories and experience. After breakfast, I called Frederick from the chess club. Would you like to play a game? I asked. Or even 2? I'd love to, he replied. You seem cheerful today. Did something happen? Let's just say I closed a long and unpleasant gestalt in my life. And now what? I looked out the window at the sun-drenched streets of Bluefield, the town that was now truly my home. Now I begin a new chapter. No pretense or false hopes. Just living in the present. After hanging up the phone, I walked out onto the veranda with a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. Birds sang in the neighboring garden. An elderly couple strolled down the street holding hands. An ordinary morning in a small town. My revenge had been accomplished, and the price was high, the loss of the last illusions of family ties. But I didn't regret it. Sometimes you have to lose something to find yourself. I took a sip of juice and smiled. There was a life ahead of me, maybe lonely by traditional standards, but full of possibilities. And I was ready to face it without the weight of past disappointments, without the shadow of toxic relationships that had poisoned my last years. It was freedom, and it was worth it.